We started recording. This is a public meeting. Stephanie, would you like to do the roll call, please?
Yes, I can. And I know you all have been looking for members, so if I miss anyone, please let me know. So Senator Katie Fry Hester, Delegate Lorik Charkoudian,
Present.
Andrew Place,
Present.
Landon Farrig,
Present.
Marie Simpson, Christine Sismadia, Carol Lane, Jeff Shaw, Nancy Sopko, Mark Zucca.
Present.
Great.
And Stephanie, do we have a quorum?
We have currently 4 members present. I do not believe that is a quorum.
And that is not a quorum. All right. Well, the first order of business was the selection or election of a new chair. Nancy's joining us. Nancy just joined. Nancy Sopko's joining. But barring a quorum, I don't believe we should move forward with that election. If anyone else objects, is that a problem? We need to bump that to a future meeting.
No objection.
Andrew, if I may, could we not just do it later if more people join?
All right, good point. Thank you, Jared. All right, well, let's see if Stephanie or Jared, can you track if we do reach a quorum at some time during the meeting today? All right, yes. Bumping that to the end. So Johns Hopkins has presented the study to us. Ben, can you hear us now?
Yeah.
I can hear you. All right. All right. Ben, do you want to walk through the study for us, please? Oh, we've just lost Ben again. Ben, you're on mute, Ben, but can you hear us?
I can hear you. You can hear me?
Yes, all good. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry
all right.
for the fussing.
All right. And do you have control so you can show your screen?
Let's see. I believe so. Shall I test that?
Yes, please.
Let's see. Do you see anything?
It's
yes.
Popping up
okay.
now. Yes. Yeah, you're good.
Okay, that's great. So I'll be ready to go whenever you want me to. I've got about... Oh, okay. So what I have is about 5 slides that summarize the content of the report, and I'll go through them quickly because it's important to have discussion and feedback rather than describing what you've already received in terms of the draft. Here we. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So this was a draft actually earlier last week of the report mandated by the General Assembly in their legislation 2 years ago. And the content of this report as described in the legislation and in the mandate for the working group includes these 5 topics, and the report is organized around these topics. The report is mainly descriptive in nature with some simple calculations. So it is not including model runs, the HOPE-MD model runs that we did earlier this year to explore certain issues. Those may be useful at a future time, but the important thing was to meet the requirements of the legislation. And so we have our draft report. We've gotten some additional comments since, especially thank you, Delegate Tricutian, for your report, and excuse me, for your comments. And so we will be revising this over the next handful of days to give ample time for this to be submitted by the end of the year. So the next slides summarize briefly what's in each of the 5 sections that address the requirements of the legislation. And so the first section wanted a summary of methods that the state could use to encourage electricity storage technology research. And so we reviewed legislation in other states, as well as federal legislation that addresses storage incentives in general. And we also looked in particular at research support. California is investing a couple $100 million. I wouldn't call it research, I would call it more demonstration and supports of deployment. But anyway, they're in it in a big way, far more than any other state. The report, that section of the report also emphasizes the role of capacity expansion planning and the need to understand the various sources of value, the value stack for storage, and how that value stack can be translated into revenues for storage facilities, encouraging their investment. And we note that this value stack has changed greatly over just the last handful of 2-3 years, at least in California and Texas, where storage used to be mainly for balancing and other ancillary services, especially regulation up and regulation down, balancing on a 5 second, the signals that are sent out every few seconds to maintain the frequency of the grid. That was a handful of years ago. Now, most of the storage being invested, at least in those 2 markets, is for essentially day-night arbitrage to save energy for the key periods that they are needed, usually in the late afternoon, early evening. Second section focuses on resilience in the face of outages. So we reviewed recent power outage profiles in Maryland. I note that the recent history, which you see on the right of this diagram here, has not experienced outages as severe as in the 2010s, when we had things like the derecho and hurricanes. And so, of course, those type of meteorological events will return and should be guarded against. So I'd like to note that a large fraction of the outages experienced by individual customers and critical loads are in excess of 8 hours. And so you cannot depend on 4-hour storage batteries to meet the entire load during such outages. That means that if you are relying on batteries, you're going to have to do demand management to make sure that you meet the absolute critical needs of the facility. And the section in general identifies critical infrastructure needs and other strategies to ensure uninterrupted service. So storage can definitely provide value, it can handle most outages, especially for residential customers, but for critical loads, water and wastewater treatment plants, health facilities, the backup diesels will still be needed in case the outages are very extended. The third section summarizes distribution transformation projects, strategies such as storage as a transmission asset for reducing distribution and transmission grid congestion and enhanced reliability. And we talk about some of the institutional experience in New York and California, where there have been initiatives to integrate distribution and bulk system operations and planning with an eye to enhancing the resilience of both. Those efforts have actually waned somewhat, and the report should discuss some of the reasons for that. I believe that that's something that we're going to be including in the revisions to the report. We also mentioned the FERC orders 2222 and 1920, which address respectively the role of storage in markets, making sure that they receive revenues that reflect their all their sources of value. In 1920, which is about long-run transmission planning, coordination among ISOs, recognizing the value, for example, of linking areas with diverse loads and diverse renewable sources that can complement each other. The fourth section looks at existing sites, especially those in which facilities have been or will be retired in the near future, and the potential to leverage that to expand clean energy. So there are at least a couple of issues of consideration here, and one is, of course, the quality of the renewable resource itself, the suitability of the site. So, of course, for wind, there are all sorts of issues there that limit the potential for wind. That would require site-specific study. For solar, the restrictions are less, and we look there at, acreage that might become available. So assuming that roughly half the acreage on these brownfield sites would be available for solar development, we might be able to increase solar capacity, grid scale solar capacity, by roughly a third in Maryland by taking advantage of those 200 megawatts. That's assuming about 2.5 square miles, 1,500 acres that are developable. It's also assuming, and this is very important, that the interconnection capability at these sites can be utilized and transferred in a reasonable time frame, existing facilities. And PJM has an initiative in this area to try to facilitate that, but there are definitely doubts, definitely concerns about whether interconnections can be done quickly on the order of a year or two, or might drag out to a half decade or longer. This is a very important issue. If these areas were used instead for storage, based on experience with large-scale storage facilities elsewhere, instead of 200 megawatts in the case of solar, you can get roughly 100 times that in terms of storage capability. Of course, citing safety of nearby populations in the face of fire and explosion risks, which were experienced at, for example, Moss Landing in California. Those are all site-specific considerations that would have to be factored in when the certificates of convenience and necessity are applied for at the Public Service Commission. And we don't address site-specific issues, but there does seem to be plenty of area there. And so if the interconnections are available and if the siting is judged to be appropriate. They'll look like there'll be ample capacity at these sites for storage, some for PV, and then less for other resources. This is just a table of sites of developed power plants that could conceivably be converted if the facilities are retired, or in those cases where facilities are already retired. Finally, the legislation mandated a review of lifespan and viability of certain enumerated clean energy technologies. And we provide an overview of those technologies, what's already been developed in the state, and what might be developed in the future. So here we tabulate the anticipated lifetimes. One thing I'd like to note about the lifetimes, of course, is that as technology improves, economic obsolescence may mean that you should retire these facilities well before their physical lifetimes. In the case of solar and wind, especially if sites become scarce, the land will maybe more value if the land has a resource potential that's of high quality, that may be more valuable redeveloped rather than preserve the facilities forever. So any of you who've ever driven in the East Bay of California, the San Francisco Bay, over Altamont Pass, it's like a museum of wind technology over the last 40 years. Remember the little egg beaters and things like that. And they're squatting on very valuable territory that could be yield much more wind power in the future. But at any rate, we did not address issues of end of life recycling and reuse, disposal of things like solar panels themselves. Very important issue. Something that's being, at least in the case of solar panels, is being addressed by another working group. And so that's a quick Cook's tour of the report. Glad to answer questions, and especially to take any comments or suggestions on it. And I realize you haven't had it for very long. If it's been distributed to you, and so we very much welcome comments that you might send later, as long as we have a sufficient time to incorporate them and make the revisions before the report needs to be submitted and for use by the state, the assembly, and of course the public. Okay, back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, I would note to your point about comments that my expectation is that written comments would come back to you and Yuri by close of business on Friday, and we make this final by Tuesday of next week, the 17th, with the expectation of submitting it as required by the statute on the 20th of December, next Friday, a week from this coming Friday. Delegate Shahrikian, you dropped a note into the chat.
I did. Yeah, I did. I think, I put most of my comments in writing. It occurred to me again here, as I understand the CIR transfer issues, and I think I sort of referenced this. The points in the report that talk about this could be a potential, but it might not, because it could take 6 years. Like on CIR transfers, it's my sense that, a change in PJM rules could significantly shift the time frame, right? So they started to shift the rules so that, as I understand it, there may be someone here who understands it better, but as I understand it, they sort of started to shift the rules so that the CIR transfer doesn't have to go through the entire queue, which many of us have been advocating for. But the rules as they currently stand, I think, still allow for significant use of market power to keep new plants out, depending on the incentives that a current retiring plant has. And so I think, what other plants they have in the area and so on. I think again, because PJM creates all the markets that they have, they can set the rules that make certain things happen or don't happen. So my point on this and a few other things I think that I highlighted in my written comments is I think it's useful to point out when there's a delay or a challenge or something, like which policymaker kind of theoretically could address it. So like with CIR transfers, that's really PJM. With some things, it's the General Assembly. With other things, it's the PSC. And the reason I feel like that's useful is as we're looking at like, okay, here's the usefulness or advantages and disadvantages of like building on a particular thing that you've highlighted. Who's the policymaker that could change it? I just think that's really important. As a policymaker, it makes it much more useful for us to figure out, then let's do this in this upcoming session, or, let's organize the governors to send another letter to PJM, or let's file with FERC, or whatever it might be. So does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And we'll be happy to look at that over the next week, at least give a high level summary of those things. I through the Future Power Market Forum, I do work with Rob Gramlich and other folks at Grid Strategies. And so I can definitely give them a buzz and get their take on this, because these are issues that they are extremely concerned with. So let's see what we can do in the next handful of days. I can't say it's going to be necessarily a highly original or creative addressing of the issue, but let's thanks to the web, there's a lot that we can come up with to summarize things.
Yeah, I think, and I don't think you have to do a new analysis. And I think Rob has a handle on both of these things, both the CIR issue, as well as, I think the other note, I'm just looking at the notes that I sent you. The other note was regulatory potential section of the report. That's the PJMQ. Like, I feel like that was a place, because there's a sec that in the regulatory potential, you have the section that's talking about like time to operation, or whatever that section is called.
Right.
And I think that's like, that is the PJMQ is a significant piece in that, and so there's the queue itself, there's the changes to the queue, there's the CIR transfer as a possibility, there's a couple other things they're playing around with. I think there's enough that has been written at this point in time by the likes of Rob and others on this issue that it shouldn't be too much just to summarize a couple of their points and just shove them in these 2 or 3 places. I don't think you have to do a whole new set of, I would hope, I'm not trying to ask you to do a whole new set of research. It's really more taking the analyses that have been done and kind of plugging them into these sections, so that my colleagues, when they pick this up, like kind of, we all have a sense of like, okay, this goes in this bucket, which we would have to change there. This is fully in our control. Let's try to fix it here. Right.
Very happy to do this. It will be fun. And so we'll do that over the next week prior to the deadline that Andrew mentioned for a week from Friday.
My kind of fun, Ben. Well,
you're kind of fun. We love this stuff. We're such nerds.
Well, I have since I'm already talking, is it okay, Andrew, if I say
absolutely? Yeah, your floor is yours.
I think it sounded in your comments like you added in repowering the storage issue, which is good. That had been one of the points that I had wanted to talk about. I think my main question that maybe you can weigh in on, and that I'm interested in the answer to, I don't know if it would change in the report or not, but offshore wind is listed in a couple of places as well, first it's listed in the section that's about distribution, grid congestion, storage. It's sort of, it's odd to me. I'm not quite understanding it, because as I see offshore wind, first of all, it's generation, and so it would be listed as generation, but it's kind of in the paragraphs that are talking about load, and so I don't understand why it's that way. And if the point you're trying to make is that it requires management of the grid because it's intermittent, I think it just sort of, that is the broader issue of, we are shifting to a grid that, if we're successful, is going to be more and more intermittent, and is going to be managed with a bunch of different tools and with storage. But I get, so I'm not sure I understand why it's kind of framed that way.
So thanks for the comment, and it's spot on. There's, offshore wind doesn't contribute any more or less to these issues than any other supply technology.
I mean, in fact, it has the highest capacity rating, so it would. It is the highest capacity rating, and so in some ways, it's the strongest of the. That's why it was weird that it was picked on, I guess.
Well, it really was talking.
If I may,
about go ahead.
Sorry, Delegate Charcuti, and I just wanted to piggyback on what you said, because as I was reading the report and the offshore wind mentions, it did seem a little. It did have a bit of a negative slant when offshore wind was mentioned, and so I wanted to bring that to the attention of the authors to make sure that it's not singled out as the problem child, but rather something that could contribute significantly to the state's energy portfolio.
I entirely agree. So any mention of offshore wind in those paragraphs should be removed, because the focus of those paragraphs is on load, demand side, and distribution. And we certainly don't want people going around quoting a report as saying that offshore wind is causing problems for the distribution grid. So that's a great catch. That was phraseology that was chosen when drafting things in a rush, and I really appreciate your catch on that. So that will be deleted and rephrased by next week.
Yeah, the only other thing I wanted to mention, there's a conversation about Brandon Shores, and I feel like I want to ask you to be really careful. I'm not necessarily asking you to. I think one of the challenges that we're in right now, as we have these conversations about energy in the state, is people repeatedly point to Brandon Shores closing as though there was a state policy that led to that. And I, for the life of me, cannot find the state policy, with the exception of maybe our membership in Reggie. But I can't find the state policy that led to that closing. So if there's someone on this call who can point that out to me, I'm like, I've been waiting for that, because PJM runs around saying it was our state policy. We have people now in the General Assembly suggesting it was our state policy that led to its closure. In fact, we've worked really hard. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I think, the way that this is written, it talks about like that it was doing a system-wide analysis. Again, I think that's like the language that we're using in areas in states that have integrated utilities, vertically integrated utilities, where we could control whether a plant closes or not. And I think, in fact, in the case of Brandon Shores, there were lots of people doing system-wide analysis. I was part of the advocacy at PJM. I was part of the conversations in the General Assembly to try to get out ahead of it, to try to get battery storage there, to try to plan for it. And it is, in fact, I hate to keep beating up on PJM, but it is their fault. It is because of their rules about, you don't have to tell anyone until 3 months, even though all of us can see the writing on the wall for 3 years. that now it's closed, and then we're in an RMR and emergency transmission planning. So I think there's so much misinformation out there about that plant's closure, and it's people trying to tie it to state policy, that I think it's super important that we get the language right in talking about it. And while you didn't come out and say, the report doesn't come out and say it was state policy, in saying what the report does say is it suggests doing system-wide analysis before shutting down fossil fuel plants. We can't shut down fossil fuel. I wish we could. I would. I'd be happy to shut all the coal plants down, but we can't. And so and that is such a misperception that seems to be out there. I think it would be really helpful. First of all, I think we just need to fix that paragraph so it doesn't suggest that we can, but it also might be helpful to take this opportunity to explain how fossil fuel plants in Maryland actually do shut down, because that would be helpful to clarify as people think about what our policy options are going forward.
Okay. Yeah, we would be definitely glad to work on the phraseology of that. And if you'd like to run that by you before things are finalized.
I mean, sure. And if there's someone else on this call who can tell me if they think that there's a state policy, I'm not trying to be smart. I actually really am trying to understand why people keep kind of suggesting that, and that I'm missing something. So I don't know if anyone else, who works on state policy on this call, has an idea of sort of the framing of that, or how we've gotten ourselves into this place that there seems to be that idea that we can do something before a plant closes.
Yeah, I mean, I just jump in that, Ben, I presume your answer is going to be that it was economics. It was pure economics that precipitated the closure.
And some of the economics, of course, driven by RGGI and coal ash disposal rules and things like that constrain the economics of the market and make it more expensive to operate. But it's not rules and regulations pointing directly at particular plants or technologies say they have to close. These are generic things. We don't want to have happen here what happened in North Carolina and Tennessee with the coal ash ponds, and of course we have 10 states in RGGI, and this is if not a national priority, it's certainly a regional priority to lower CO2 emissions, and that will mean lower capacity factors for high emitting facilities, and perhaps the best way to deal with that is closing some, but letting the market. The idea is to let the market determine that the most cost effective way of lowering emissions.
So I guess if that's potentially the state policy, but I think that the language of do a system-wide analysis before retiring them, it's just not clear who would do that. What would we do? Do a system-wide analysis and then remove our coal ash requirements on a particular plant, or take them out of RGGI, or give them subsidize coal to keep it open? I guess that's what we're doing now with RMR. But I think that's the part that I'm not sure what that means in the state of Maryland.
Okay, but we'll definitely take a look at that. And now that we understand that basically the state of Maryland, by restructuring a decade and a half ago, it's deliberately making a decision that we're going to let the market determine what's the best way to meet these rules and meet consumer demands without going through complicated integrated resource planning processes. I mean, there are, as is pointed out, the state could change its policies. We know what Texas is doing. We know how California has a IRP process, direct investment in a nominally restructured market. But those would be dramatic changes in policy, not something that could be done under present policy.
And just to be clear, I'll say one other thing and then I'll stop. I think suggesting that we implement an integrated resource plan, suggesting that we do better energy planning, I think that everyone's kind of on board and arriving at that conclusion. And I think that's totally appropriate. I just think the actual language in your report says do a system-wide analysis before retiring fossil fuel plants. That suggests that we're making the call of what to retire.
Yeah.
As opposed to do an integrated resource plan. So over time, we're sure that the resources we have match our, climate goals and resiliency and reliability. That's a different sort of a statement, which I think is totally appropriate.
Okay. Really appreciate these suggestions, and definitely welcome more from you and from anybody else who has either things that they catch or issues such as interconnection that could be usefully expanded upon in the time that we have left.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Do you have a hard stop, or can you stay on if folks still have
Oh
questions?
yeah, I'm happy to stay on.
Yeah, there may not be others, but
You're rescuing me from departmental administrative meetings, so I'm happy to stay on.
then I've done good work in this world today. Other members of the working group, comments? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Ben. Much appreciated. Thanks for the work today as well. And we'll stay in touch in the days ahead.
Great. Looking forward to any additional comments we get by Friday. Thanks in advance.
Thank you.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes, and who is this?
This is Senator Hester. I've been trying to get off mute for a while. Is Ben still there?
Oh, sorry,
Yes.
Ben.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, first of all, and the entire team for working so hard on the report. I had 3 questions or comments. The first one was in the way back, like pages. Well, it starts where you're looking at the different retiring facilities and whether they could be used for wind, solar, or biofuel. And the conversations that I've heard have been a lot around SMR at old, coal-fired facilities. And I guess that's not included because it wasn't legislated, but it seems like we're kind of missing a beat there to not give it a little more airtime. That was my first question.
I'm sorry, FMR is
Small
I'm sorry, what's that
modular
an acronym?
reactor.
Oh, SMR. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So the reason that's not in there is the time scale, and it's on the legislation. But we would be glad to make some comments on that.
So could I suggest that you talk to Christine from the nuclear energy industry? Because I was just at a conference where, they were talking about pending federal legislation, and, the new administration is kind of pro-nuclear. So if the legislation passes, that would dramatically reduce the time to permit. So I think it's worth at least a mention. I mean, other states are passing policies to do site permitting at old, at these type of sites. So I think just a little foreshadowing of the changing environment could help. I don't know what others think.
So how do you spell Chris's name?
It's in Christina Sismeda. It's is that who you meant, Senator?
Yeah, with the nuclear energy industry. I mean, she should be on the call, right?
Yeah,
And this
she's
is-
not on the call today.
Great.
But
she's a member of the committee.
Yeah, it's on the website, Ben, but its last name is CSIZMADIA, Christine Sismeda.
Great idea. I'm assuming that her email is addressed on something. I can find that, and I'll be glad to email her and see if I can arrange a call and get her perspective on things. And so we'll be glad to foreshadow what might be coming, what changes might occur. And of course, we've been doing modular reactors on boats for since Admiral Rickover, so it's not out of the question.
So I was just curious for my edification, when you were looking at the site, you know, you've got that's 25 sites. And then you also mentioned that there had been some kind of, couple pages later, there'd been some analysis of Southern Maryland as, you know, having favorable geology. Did you actually look, like, lay over that favorable geology with the list of plants that might be retiring?
So we have not. I didn't have a hand in writing that part of the report, but I can certainly find out. And of course, if we have a report on the geology, that's a very easy thing to do, to find out which of these sites, especially ones with that are relatively larger, could conceivably be used.
I think that'd be super helpful. My second question is something I can actually volunteer to help with. Where you talk about the state land and the availability for solar, I want to double check that you've actually got the latest information. There were a couple of different runs of the GG Plus tool that we got. One did not have the Department of Transportation land in it, and the other one did. So if you don't mind, I'll just send you an email tonight to confirm that the numbers that you have is the most up-to-date information available to us. And happy to copy MEA when I send that.
That would be absolutely terrific. Certainly don't want to use something that's outdated. We want something that actually accurately reflects what's out there, and might be utilized.
It could be right. I just need to double check. And my third comment was more a comment for the group about this report and its positioning. I was wondering, Andrew, I guess, if it might be with, if the committee wanted to write like an introductory letter or something to this report, just kind of once again flagging that the working groups, met for a year, we issued these other recommendations, or do you want this report to be like completely separate from the work of this working group? That was a broader question for, the chair and I guess the group members.
Yeah, my hope or expectation, and others please jump in if it does not comport with what your expectations would be to do a cover letter. Just to your point, Senator, that this was we met for a year, etc. This is the working group's study analysis.
Yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page, but also slightly different. Because so much of our work has included things that are not in this report. Does it make sense to reference that in the cover letter and include our recommendations as a appendix, or it just, the report kind of makes it look like this is all we've done so far, which it's a huge piece of it, but I just wanted to acknowledge that we have done other pieces of the puzzle.
All right, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I was thinking of those two as distinctly different, but you're right that it would be probably useful optically to note that, yeah, this is not the totality of the work the working group has, and as you said, reference obliquely the other work we've done, which that last sentence in the statute says that the working group will report its findings to the General Assembly and the Climate Commission, and I was using that to be, all right, what we do next year, and distinct from this discrete deliverable as required by the statute, and that I wanted to get this in this year, this calendar year. But I had every expectation, and we've talked about white paper, every expectation that we would be reporting future findings to the General Assembly as required. But that's
yeah,
it.
well, just in case,
go ahead.
Just in case we don't get that white paper out by mid-January, I think we could include, I still don't know if it's buried in the minutes or it's actually available as standalone document. the recommendations that we like really wordsmith, like all of us, like just, I mean, if they're published on the website, that's great. If the cover letter has a link to the recommendations published on the website, that would be great. I just think we run the risk of this report coming out and folks thinking this is all we've done this year. So I think it's a fabulous report, but I just like to open it up just a little bit so that it's put into perspective.
Perfect. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's brilliant. And I think if we miss the opportunity, it would be a missed opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Those are my 3 points.
Yeah, and Senator, I'll start to draft that, and I'll circulate that around in the coming days. Delegate Charkoudian, you have your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I want to build on what Senator Hester said about nuclear. I think we need to walk a really fine line, because I do think that it's appropriate to be looking at SMRs in replacing plants, but I also think that it's important to be realistic, and it is possible that there'll be some streamlining at the federal level. I still think that technology, the thing I worry about right now is that our faith in SMRs as our future is going to lead to a massive expansion of fossil fuel plants in the interim. And we have to really look at the next 10 years in a realistic way. And best case scenario, we have SMRs in 8 years, maybe 10 years, maybe at the scale that we need, but likely it will be longer. And so I think that we should do the analysis, because I think that is a really important piece of like long-term energy planning. But I would encourage you to continue to really highlight information that would help us consider the reality of how long it's going to take.
Ben, you're on mute.
I just need one word, which is agreed. Happy to do that.
Other working group members? Seeing none, Ben, again, thank you very much, and we look forward to the continuing cogitation on this in the days ahead. And just a note, close of business by Friday is you'll have everything from us.
That's great. Very much looking forward to it. And thanks for inviting me to continue with the rest of the meeting. Look forward to hearing the other agenda items.
Thank you, Ben. Well, we do now have a quorum. Is that correct, Jared or Stephanie?
Yes, we have 6 members present.
All right, thank you. With that in mind, it was on the agenda today to at least have a conversation, if not a nomination for chair of this working group for the coming year. I will not be staying on. I'll stay on the commission. I'll stay on the working group, of course, but I'll step away from being chair. I took that on as to get this working group off the ground, and I'll be stepping away from that role. With that in mind, this is not something that has to be done today, but if there's an interest, if someone is interested in putting their names forward or volunteering someone else, please speak. All right, I won't beleaguer the point. We will, unless someone jumps forward in the next 30 seconds here, let's assume that's tabled for future consideration. But that's something that we do need to address before at some point here ahead of us. All right, with that in mind, is there any further business that working group members would like to bring before the working group today? Seeing none, Moving to public comment. Jeff Silva, I believe you noted something in the text. If you the messages, if you'd like to state that, or please do if you'd like.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Basically, I just made a text comment. It happens to do with the fact that nuclear facilities have been used as a weapon to in a war zone. And I'm concerned about Maryland being would be contested territory in the event that we have a civil upheaval due to, climate tribulation. It's only going to get worse. We've already seen the adversity or animosity that our current government is held in by the general public from what we've seen in the last election. Remember, Maryland was was occupied territory during the last Civil War. And I don't think the nuclear facilities are a good idea. Number two, we're coming up to the commission's meeting where they will be arguing over your proposal, 1A of where the PSC should issue a policy statement for the prioritization of battery storage and other demand response systems on our distribution grid. I support that. I don't understand the following recommendation or proposal, the 1B, but I trust your judgment and your knowledge for coming up with your suggestions. As Professor Hobbs mentioned, the dedicated alternating current frequency control of the electricity network is being established by electricity grids in the US and non-US networks that are farther advanced towards becoming a distributed and integrated electricity generated and energy storage system as compared to our Maryland one-way outward flow of electricity from centralized producers of electricity. I request that the Energy Resilience and Efficiency Working Group propose to the Commission to include requiring Maryland to install dedicated alternating current frequency control stations in our electricity network to facilitate the reliability of using multiple renewable energy sources in our electricity distribution system. These other systems have encountered the same problem that Professor Hobbs had mentioned, and they have already come up with installations and relying on those technologies to incorporate the problem of intermittency from renewable energy. I support renewable energy and I want its success, and I'm sure the rest of Maryland citizens want the advantage of regionally supplied and more regional and local, thriving local economies that our localized energy production would provide. Thank you very much. I appreciate your efforts.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Silva. Other comments?
Let's see. Would it be okay if I followed up on Jeff's comment there? Because I think he raises an interesting and important point that there are actually two issues I think, Jeff, you were alluding to. One is intermittency, where the availability of resource over time, and of course one approach to that is storage, and another approach to that is strengthened connections with other markets, so to take advantage of load and resource diversity. The first problem referring to the frequency stability. So there have been experienced some problems in some grids with subsynchronous, that is less than 60 or 50 cycle, depending on where you are, variations in voltage, colloquially known as the wobble, that causes, for example, traffic lights in Glasgow to blink on and off. And so National Grid in the UK has basically had a solicitation and is contracted for something called synchronous condensers, which are basically rotating machines that they're not generators like we have rotating at Brandon Shores and in natural gas combined cycle. You have rotating machines that provide stability to the grid that are generators. You can also simply have rotating machines that aren't providing net power to the grid, but are providing inertia and frequency stability services. So you can contract for those. And in the future, there's something called grid forming inverters that from storage, wind, and solar, which have solid state devices to form the AC waveform. They're not rotating machines that synchronize the grid, but you need to inject AC power. And these inverter devices can be designed to provide frequency stability services, in a sense, kind of fake inertia. And in the next solicitation that National Grid will have in the UK, they're dealing with problems up in Scotland where there's a lot of renewables that are then being fed down south to England across Hadrian's Wall. That in this solicitation, not only are synchronous converters the old-fashioned way of providing frequency stability eligible, but also these new grid forming technologies from renewables. So there's a lot of excitement about that, and it's definitely an issue with grids such as Denmark, the UK, Texas, California, Australia, which occasionally or frequently experience periods where you have 50% or more wind and solar. So that's something that they're dealing with. We're not in that situation yet, although hopefully will be with, the time scale of a decade or two. And so the frequency stability services are definitely something that will need to probably do something like what Texas is doing, where they have a formal process, stakeholder process for evaluating alternatives, understanding the need, communicating what the problem is. Texas is ahead of us, of course, in terms of wind penetration and so forth, but we'll be in the same place within a decade, and we may want to do something similar. So it's a problem that's on the horizon, needs to be dealt with. And thank you, Mr. Silva, for raising the issue.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Ben.
Professor Hobbs.
Thank you.
I appreciate your examination of that problem and your depth of this of answering my my issue. All right. Thanks again, crew. Bye now.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. And Ben, I didn't expect Emperor Hadrian to be mentioned this morning, but much appreciated.
I love a Roman reference.
There we go.
Try to get it in there any way I can.
There we go. Perfect. Well done. All right. With that said, any other public comments? I'm not seeing anyone. All right. Thank you. With that, our next public meeting for this working group is February 4th at 9 a.m. Look forward to seeing you all then. And we have quite a bit of work ahead of us between now and then, of course. And with that, if there's no further comments, I will adjourn this working group for today. Thank you all.